Start. And my name is Jim Holbrook. I'm a professor here in what's called a clinical professor. So I teach negotiation, mediation, arbitration. Michelle and I have taught together for many years. And once upon a time, we had a training that we called the Make Nice training that was designed to talk about addressing high conflict communication. And so this is an evolution of that, and it fits in specifically in some work that Michelle is doing recently. So if you want to describe that, introduce yourself.
The work that I'm doing recently. So my name is Michelle Strobe, and I am also a professor at the law school. I am also the director of the Environmental Dispute Resolution Program here at the law school, and I teach environmental conflict resolution and conflict management. And I think the work that you're talking about is a series of meetings this week, national conferences, and then later this afternoon, it's on the back of your handout, a dialogue on collaboration. So we've been doing some work and bringing experts together to talk about dialogue. How is it that we talk to each other as human beings? And so we have actually focused this CLE somewhat on that topic as well as sort of an introduction to this afternoon. And I don't know how many of you will be able to join us, but it's going to be over, still on this floor, but over on that corner of the floor.
I also serve as a mediator, and I've done more than 600 mediations. So I've watched more than 600 pairs of lawyers negotiating. And an observation that I had many years ago is that lawyers have difficulty in a conversation in a conflict. And turn to page 22. We'll talk about this in more detail, but it'll illustrate what I'm talking about. In that lower left-hand quadrant, this is where the parties at the moment have low regard for their relationship and little incentive for a mutually acceptable outcome. And we're calling it performative negotiation. And what it looks like and sounds like is monologues that get repeated by each other. And we're going to give you an exercise so you'll have an experience of this. But this is very unproductive kinds of communication. It doesn't sound like a real conversation, and it's certainly not a dialogue. And one of a mediator's objectives is to help the parties get out of that particular box. And the best way for them to get out of the box is to turn their performance of their monologues into a real conversation where there's turn-taking and listening, and that then becomes a dialogue. And as you know just from your own lives, when you're in a conversation, a true conversation, it takes on a life of its own. It goes where it wants, and it accomplishes what it wants. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. You're getting professionalism and civility credit, so we need to talk about that too in order to deserve our 1 hour of credit. So turn to page 3. This is in the preamble, and if you look at the, I think 30 statements, which we haven't included, many of them are sort of prohibitory, you shall not kinds of things. So the real philosophy, I think, about dialogue is in the preamble, and we can look at it together. Personal courtesy and professional integrity are emphasized here. And in a real dialogue, that becomes natural, and instead of self-conscious. Just the turn-taking expectation of a conversation reflects personal courtesy and professional integrity. It also talks about a truth-seeking process. And in the kind of dialogue that we're going to be talking about today, especially Michelle, truth-seeking in a relationship trying to resolve problems becomes extremely important. So that's another piece of the preamble. If lawyers, for example, remained in that performative box that we just looked at, their communication would be, and this is the last small paragraph, it would be uncivil, abrasive, often abusive, hostile, and obstructive, because that's what it sounds like when they're in that box. So what we're going to do today is talk about how you get out of that box and create real dialogue. Turn to page 11, we'll talk a little bit more about this. But there is a thoughtful way to visualize where it is we're going. And you want to have an intention about what you're going to accomplish in this communication. And then you choose communicative behaviors. And you see what those communicative behaviors, what kind of response they create in the person you're dealing with. And if the response is not what you want, then you evaluate what is happening in that communication, and you modify either your intention or your behavior and try again. So this is a constant feedback loop, and it's natural in a conversation. You know, the conversation has these elements just naturally. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Yes, but we're not only going to talk, we're going to put you guys to work too. And first we're going to have you play a little game. So after I tell you what the game is, and the game is in fact on page 3. No, not on page 3, on page 4 of your handout. So first off, does everyone raise your hand if you do not know how to thumb wrestle? Well, you laugh. I always assumed everyone you don't know how to thumb wrestle. You're going to be able to thumb wrestle, and so the idea, pretend I am two people, and the idea is you're trying to somehow pin the other person's thumb. Okay, that's the general idea. Was that right? That's
yeah.
Okay, so you're going to thumb wrestle, which one does in pairs, and we're going to do it in 2 rounds. And in the first round, please do not talk to whomever it is that you've paired yourself up with. You're just going to do what I tell you. And then in the second round, you'll have an opportunity to talk before you do what I tell you to do. So how's about you choose a partner. If you're not already sitting next to someone, you may have to move. It's good exercise. Okay, are we all partnered up? All right, so now that you're partnered up, stop talking. There's no talking for the first round, I'm so sorry. And when we're ready to start the round of thumb wrestling, which I'm now going to assume everybody knows how to do, I'm going to say get set, go, and you're going to go for 15 seconds, and the objective is to score as many points as you can in 15 seconds. We good? Score as many points as you can in 15 seconds. And then later, I'm going to ask you how many points you won. So you actually have to remember some numbers too. All right? Are we ready? Are we set? Shall we go? Stop. Now, why do Jim and I love this exercise? Because you're already laughing. It's so good. Okay, so who thinks that they got a relatively large number of points? Okay, what, over here? Each? 24 each. Anybody get more than 24? You got one. Okay, so that's what I was going to ask next. What was the lowest points? Are we on 1 or 0? 1. All right. So some people, well, maybe everybody has room for improvement, but it sounds like some might have some room for improvement. Okay, so now chat a little bit amongst yourselves in your little pair, and we're going to do it again. And, well, you can chat about whatever you like to, but just remember that the goal is to score as many points as you can in 15 seconds, and you're going to have another 15 seconds soon. Chat. Okay. You're not chatting. Oh. Yeah, and if I don't hit all the teaching points that you think are important, you should speak up. Okay, I hear the tone going down, so that's going to be the end of the talk. And ready, set. Okay, ready, set, go. And stop. All right. So did anybody get more than 24? What more than 24? Anyone get more than 57? And you're the ones who started with 24. So you went to 81. Did anyone get 81? My gosh, they do finger exercises at home. Okay. Anyone get more than 81? Yeah, 1 pin is 1 point. $8,000 points. Okay, thank you that I need to clarify that more the next time I do it. All right, so I mean the general point I think is that after communication it sounds like the numbers in general went up, but not for everyone. Okay, so rather than do it the way we do in law school, which is I ask the students, why is it do you think I asked you to do this exercise? I will tell you why I asked you to do the exercise. Sorry, in the interest of time. So one of the points of the exercise I hope that you got is that working together often maximizes the individual gain. So if you figure out a way, actually I should ask, the 81, how did you end up getting 81? What was your technique, as it were? Okay. By physically doing this how? Okay. Anybody else have a different technique to get a pretty high number? Okay. So when I have seen this done before, perhaps I've done it a few times before, people do this and they count them right off. You get 1, 1, 1. But again, it's the coordinated activity that gets you to the higher numbers. The idea being that the working together maximizes each person's gain. It maximizes the joint gain. So the reason we're doing the exercise today is to highlight the importance of communication and dialogue. I didn't hear all your dialogues or your communications, but I'm going to assume you talked about what your common objective was. So what is it that we're trying to accomplish together? What are some ways that we can accomplish that together? What's our different options for how we're going to achieve that objective? And then you implement it. And if I were to allow you to do it again, you might adapt and implement it a little differently and get even better numbers. Who knows? But the communication is about a lot of different things that are all trying to get underneath of what are we trying to accomplish and how can we do that the best together. And so to some extent, the communication follows the intention-response feedback loop that Jim was just telling you about. So did anybody have an agreement and then one of the partners didn't follow through on the agreement? Let me say that when law students play this game, we often have someone who didn't follow through on their agreement, which then raises the issue of if I were to have you do a third round, how would that particular pair where somebody didn't follow through on the agreement, how would that go? So there are trust issues in our communications and our dialogues as well, right? What goes around comes around. If we don't behave well in a dialogue, it may very well come back to hurt us in the future. And I think as lawyers, you probably don't even need to hear that. You know that from your own experience. The one other teaching point, and Jim may have more, is that the objective was to win as much as you can in 15 minutes. And you is both a singular word and a plural word. And everybody hears that differently. So, and in this game, it doesn't necessarily make a difference which one it is that you think it is, the you, whether it's singular or plural. But the importance is that how you frame what your common objective is, how you talk about it, is going to make a difference for how it is that people are going to communicate about it and how willing they are going to be to work together.
Yeah, and often we take the you to be a singular you. And so we then default into what's called a zero-sum game, that for me to win, I have to prevent you from winning. And when you think about negotiation, that is really a stupid strategy, because what you want to do is incentivize your counterpart to work with you, and you do that by, in a sense, helping your counterpart get what she needs in the negotiation. And here, if you use the plural you, in the 81 points, one person got all the 81 points, but together they created 81 points of value, which they then can share. So, a plural you makes that possible, I think.
So just to close out before Jim takes over on the next topic, is dialogue or communication, conversation is the way that you explore the what is it we're trying to achieve, what are our various ways of getting there, and the thing that we tried, did it get us to where we wanted to go? Oh, no, well, maybe let's talk about it a little bit more. We'll think of some other ways to do that. Okay,
so stay with your partner because we're going to give you a couple of exercises. What you need to do right now with your partner is one of you needs to choose to be Smith and the other needs to be Jones. So make that decision right now. One is Smith and the other is Jones. Okay, for those of you who are Smith, your instructions are on page 8. For those of you who are Jones, your instructions are on page 9. So read this scenario and your instructions carefully. And then when you're finished reading, look up and we'll have a sense that we'll be ready to start. Has everybody finished reading? Okay. To get the most out of this exercise, it's important to be a good actor and to feel the feelings that your character would feel and say the kinds of things that your character would say. So be a good actor. Go ahead and have this conversation. I think like 2 minutes or 3 minutes. Okay, let's stop. Thank your partner for being such a good actor. That's how you created the value in this exercise, is by being a good actor. Take a minute now and talk with your partner about what happened in this communication. Okay, let me interrupt your deconstruction of your communication and ask you to turn to page 6 and read that, and then with your partner, how many of those 6 characteristics did you experience in this communication you just had? So how many of you experienced all 6 of these characteristics in the communication you had? Yeah, virtually everybody. This is what happens in that lower left-hand quadrant, that performative negotiation quadrant. And several teaching points are important here. Where was the time focus of your communication? In the past. Can problems be solved in the past? No. So you have to shift the time focus from the past to the present. And so how do you do that? You do it by asking questions like, what do you want? Or what can I do? What would be helpful? Just the formation of the question shifts the time focus from the past to the present. The other thing, and this is kind of counterintuitive for law-trained people, does it make any difference that you have to agree who was right and who was wrong, or who was to blame, in order to solve the problem? You don't have to do that. So you don't have to talk about blaming anymore. You can move immediately to what should we do to make this better, to fix it. So blaming and who's right and wrong really becomes irrelevant for problem solving. Okay, let's try this again with same character. So if you were Smith, you're continuing to be Smith. Do we give them the other
It's
one?
in there, but do you want me to talk about interests and stuff first before they try it, or should they try it?
Or do you want to do that in the debrief?
Okay, go ahead. Okay,
Yeah.
so the next.
So if you're
version-
Smith, go to page 13. And if you're Jones, page 14. The facts are the same, so you don't have to spend any time reading the facts, but your instructions are different. So read your instructions very carefully. And then look up when you're ready to have that conversation. Okay. Again, be a good actor. Say the kinds of things your character would say, have the kinds of feelings your character would feel. And go ahead and have this communication.
There's people who don't have partners.
Okay, let's stop. Again, thank your partner for being such a good actor. And now, as you debrief this, how was this communication different from the first one you had? And talk about that. Talk about this with your partner. Yeah.
But that's good. Asking
Yeah,
questions
right.
is good.
And as you're deconstructing it with your partner, turn to page 10 and see how many of those interventions, those behaviors you used in this second conversation. Page 10. So what you naturally did in this second communication is you created dialogue. And you used many of these behaviors, maybe even unselfconsciously. So if you look on 11, you were instinctively using this feedback loop in that dialogue. And so you were in one of the problem-solving quadrants on the negotiation strategies that we looked at, probably in the upper right-hand quadrant, the so-called integrative negotiation. And you were just doing that naturally. So the more that you become self-conscious about what this is and how you create it, the more effective you'll be in creating it when it's important.
And so, to help, question?
Well, right. The instructions on the second go around.
But that's what you when you're preparing to negotiate or preparing to have a dialogue, you want to get into that mindset, and you want to. In fact, I've stopped using the phrase opposing party and replaced it with counterpart. And we'll talk later about why your counterpart is so valuable to you in dialogue. But Michelle's going to share with you some other concepts that are important.
That may help you get yourself and your counterpart into the right frame of mind. But yeah, one more question.
I know.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Often clients want you to be a warrior. And that's where it's important to counsel a client that that's not an effective way for you to represent them, that you want to resolve their problem quickly and inexpensively as possible with as little emotional turmoil as possible. And so therefore you have a philosophy of dispute resolution which is not to be a warrior, but to be a problem solver. And ordinarily clients don't understand this until they get your first bill. And when they get your first bill, then their attitudes tend to change a little bit.
So I think the two things I'm going to talk about next kind of address this, but from a different perspective. I should just explain, I did used to be a lawyer, a real lawyer. I now have been a mediator and a large stakeholder group facilitator, process designer for over 20 years. And so the kind of work that I do is with large stakeholder groups, 10 to 40, and most of them don't necessarily see eye to eye when they start. And so the two things that I'm going to talk to you about are things that have helped me. They're not my clients. The group, the process is my client, but have helped the people that I work with move from the we are warriors against each other to the we're all trying to resolve a problem together. And I'm hoping, or we are hoping, that this will help you as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is tell a little story, and it's the story of an orange. So here we have our orange. So there is one parent and one orange and two children. Does anybody here know this story? Really? Okay. So one parent, one orange, two children, and both the children want the orange. And the parent's pretty busy and says, kids, you need to figure this out for yourselves. And they can't, and they're just really squabbling. And so the parent says, I'm really busy, I'm just cutting it in half and we're done now. Cuts it in half, and the kids are still not happy. And so the parent realizes, well, man, there must be more to this than I thought. Let's ask a few questions. Ask child number one, so why'd you want the orange? What are you going to do with the orange? Child number one says, I'm baking a cake, and my recipe says we see where this is going, right? I need the full rind from one orange, not from a half an orange for my cake. My cake is going to taste terrible with what you've done, parent. And the other child, why did you want it? Well, I'm really thirsty, and I'm making a smoothie or something, and I need the juice of an entire orange for my smoothie. Now, my smoothie is going to taste terrible, and that's why we're not happy. Okay, end of story. But the point to the story is that oftentimes we, our clients, come into the situation with, we know the problem, we know the solution, and I want you, the lawyer, to go out there and you fight for my solution that I know is the right one. It isn't always the right one. And so in terms of in negotiation lingo, there are interests and there are positions. And the solution that you think is the right solution is your position. So in our little story of the orange, the fact that they wanted the whole orange, that was each child's position. It's the only solution that they could think of. I need and I want the whole orange. But their interests were, what is it that you're going to do with it? Why do you need that? And those interests for the kids were, one needed the rind, one needed the juice, right? Different solutions, or probably a different solution, but something totally different was possible that could actually meet the interests or the needs of both of the children. When you're having conversations with clients and opposing counsel, it is, depending on their personality, it can be difficult to move the conversation towards interests, and you probably don't even want to use the word interest because they may look at you and go, what are you talking about? But you want to, I think oftentimes you want to ask a lot of questions that go under those positions, that go under the solution that they've presented you with, this is the one thing we want and this is it, take it or leave it, with the, well, why is that important? And why does the solution that my client brought that's very different, why does that not meet your needs? And then you start getting at the conversation of what is it we're really trying to accomplish here, and you can hopefully have a much richer dialogue and conversation. So before I go to sort of the technique, is there anything you wanted to add?
Were you going to talk about 16? What Michelle is talking about, turn to page 16. And this simple example is made much more complex with a scenario called the oogly oranges. And, lots and lots of detail is added to it. And, there are backstories about conflict and so on. But the positions are the what people want, and underlying are the interests, and that's why they want what they want. And so it's important to get to the why, because that begins to create possibilities for working together, which is what dialogue is.
Which is what dialogue is. And so sort of the basic principle of all of it is that I think a lot of times we as humans look at differences, and certainly our clients look at differences as a stumbling block, as a bad thing. Differences are bad, we need to now fight. And the way we think about it, differences can actually create value. And that the differences are where you usually have something to talk about, where you actually might be able to come up with some creative solutions. So the other thing that I wanted to just share with you is the way that I talk to my stakeholders about the decision-making process that the group is going to go through. And it's a consensus-based decision-making process, and I'm actually very overt about it. They have to agree to it. But I then talk about consensus in 3 different ways. It's a noun, it is a verb, and it's a way of being. So as a noun, I think everybody knows, well, you may not have the same definition of consensus, but consensus or agreement is the objective. It's the accomplishment at the end of a negotiation, we hope, right? At the end of a successful negotiation, you have reached an agreement or a consensus. And the way I describe it to my groups is that is an agreement that everybody can sign on to. It may not be what you wanted exactly. You may not love it, but you're willing to sign on to it, and you are willing to implement it. So it's good enough that you would be willing to do whatever your part is to make it so. So that's the noun, that's your objective. The verb, striving for consensus, or as one stakeholder says, why don't you just call it consensing? We consense. Okay, good. So we consense, and striving for consensus is a process by which agreement is totally fine. In fact, it's almost necessary. But you can't just say, I disagree with whatever the option is that's on the table, the potential solution. You can't just say, I don't like it. Done. You can say, I don't like it. This is what I don't like about it. It doesn't meet my needs for XYZ reasons. And here's a suggestion. I've been listening to the conversation. Here's a suggestion that I think meets my needs and yours or everyone else's. And they put that out. And the next person can't say, I don't like that. They have to do the same thing. I do like it. I do like this part. I don't like that part. The part I don't like because, and they tell how it doesn't meet their interests. even though they don't know that's what they're doing. And then they say, and I have an idea about how we can embroider, or, you know, we can work on this some more. And it continues on and on until they have co-created something that actually meets everybody's interests. And it sounds, when I first heard this, I thought, yeah, right, this is just so not going to work. It works every single time, as long as everybody in the process is committed to continuing on with that dialogue and that conversation to find something that is going to meet everybody's needs. And definitely there are times that there isn't something that meets everybody's needs, but for the most part, in my experience, they have been able to find things that meet everybody's needs if they're open to having that kind of a dialogue.
There are really two kinds of needs, looking at it from 30,000 feet. One is the need to have an acceptable outcome, and the other is the need to be in an acceptable process. So think in your own lives, when you were involved in a transaction, a negotiation, and you got what you wanted, but you were treated badly in that process. And think of how unsatisfying and how resentful you were. You got what you wanted, but you weren't treated the way you wanted to be treated. And what dialogue does is it melds outcome and process into something that is mutually fair. And that's why it works. I don't think we have this in the materials, but there is a triage tool for conflict called ADI, agreement, disagreement, and irrelevance. So one of the things, as you create an agenda for your dialogue, you want to see what you agree about, what you disagree about, and what you disagree about that's irrelevant. And you put the agreements aside and the irrelevance aside, and you begin to work on differences, because that's where value is created. And the other observation that I have is that we who are law trained in negotiation tend to be sufficers. We tend to stop at the first feasible agreement. And business trained people, by contrast, are optimizers. They start with the first feasible agreement and try to make it better for both parties. So in your next negotiation, don't be a sufficer, try to be an optimizer.
So are we going to have them do the final little conversation as well? So I apologize that I'm going to have to leave because I have to go set up the next thing across the hall. Again, I would encourage you, it's on the back page, if you have time to join us at least for the panel part of the dialogue on collaboration. It's on the back of your handouts. It's over there, that corner of the 6th floor. You've also probably also noticed that there's more in the handouts than we are talking about today. So there are some additional exercises, a little inventory that you can do for yourself if you're interested, and additional sort of one-page summaries of things if you have more interest. But what we thought would be valuable, because we always think rather than just sitting and listening to somebody, that you actually should then have some processing time of how is it that I make this useful in my practice, in my life, in my work. We'd like you to talk either in your pairs or in larger groups, if you like, about how does dialogue fit into your practice? So sort of, does it and can it? Is there anything that you can do a little bit differently that would fit dialogue into your practice? And if you do that for maybe 5 minutes or so, and then you're going to close it up.
Turn to page 20. So that's where this exercise is. And then I do think that you want to, after you've had your conversation, write something down that you're going to try to do differently going forward.
We won't ask you to share
No.
that. But you should write something down. It's good. Okay, so thank you, and I hope to see some of you over across the hall. Okay, thanks. Oh. No. Oh, no, that's there as a reminder. It's your dialogue reminder.